What if a
I'm
single
sorry, I
moment of
forgot my
kindness could
wallet.
change everything you thought you knew about success? James Hartwell had built an empire of restaurants across 3 states. But on this particular Tuesday evening, something stopped him in his tracks. Standing in the dim light of his flagship restaurant's kitchen after closing time, he noticed her, a young waitress with tears streaming down her face as she wiped down tables, trying to hide her sobs behind quick movements and forced composure. He'd seen plenty of staff over the years, dealt with countless workplace dramas, but something about the way she held herself, the quiet dignity in her grief, made him pause. Instead of walking past as he normally would, James found himself approaching her, his expensive Italian shoes clicking softly on the tile floor. What he didn't know was that her answer to his simple question would shake the very foundation of everything he'd built. "Where are you watching from tonight?" James Hartwell wasn't the type of man who noticed things like tears anymore. Somewhere between his 3rd restaurant opening and his 20th, he'd learned to look past people and see only numbers, efficiency, profit margins. At 58, he'd become exactly what he swore he'd never be, the kind of wealthy man who'd forgotten what it felt like to struggle. His ex-wife had told him that during their divorce 3 years ago, and he'd brushed it off as bitterness. But lately, especially in quiet moments, her words echoed in his mind. The restaurant, Hartwell's on 5th, was his pride and joy. White tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, a menu that made food critics weep with joy. He'd stopped in that evening to check the books, something he did every Tuesday without fail. The dinner rush had ended an hour ago, and most of the staff had gone home. That's when he'd walked through the dining room and seen her. Her name tag read Sophie, and he vaguely remembered his manager mentioning a new hire a few weeks back. She couldn't have been more than 25, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and the kind of face that suggested she smiled often, though not tonight. She was methodically wiping down tables, her movements mechanical, but her shoulders shook with each suppressed sob. James had walked past crying employees before. It wasn't his job to be a therapist. He paid his managers well to handle personnel issues. But something made him stop this time. Maybe it was the late hour, or the way the empty restaurant felt like a cathedral in its silence. Or maybe it was just that he was tired of being the man his ex-wife had described. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gentler than he'd used in years. "Sophie, isn't it?" She jumped, nearly dropping her cleaning cloth, and quickly wiped at her face with the back of her hand. "Mr. Hartwell." "I'm sorry, I didn't know you were still here. I'll be done in just a minute, sir." "That's not why I'm here," he said, surprising himself. "Are you all right?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She opened her mouth, closed it, then let out a small, broken laugh. "I'm fine, sir. Just a long day." But her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, and fresh tears were already forming. James found himself pulling out a chair at one of the tables and sitting down, something he never did after hours. "Please," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Sit for a moment." Sophie hesitated, clearly torn between politeness and protocol. Employees didn't sit with the owner. That wasn't how things worked. But something in his face must have convinced her, because she slowly lowered herself into the chair, still clutching her cleaning cloth like a lifeline. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want an honest answer," James said. "Why are you crying?" She bit her lip, looking down at her hands. For a long moment he thought she wouldn't answer. The kitchen sounds had faded completely now, leaving only the hum of the refrigerators and the distant sound of traffic outside. "It's stupid," she finally whispered. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." Sophie took a shaky breath. "Today's my daughter's birthday. She turned 7. Her voice cracked on the number. I promised her I'd take the day off, that we'd go to the park and have a picnic, maybe go to that little arcade she loves. I promised her." James felt something twist in his chest. "What happened?" "I got called in," Sophie said, and now the tears were flowing freely. "Emergency shift. Melissa called in sick, and the manager said if I didn't come in, I'd lose my job. I'm barely making rent as it is, and Lily's school costs, and she needs new shoes." She wiped at her face roughly. "So I came in. I left my 7-year-old daughter with my neighbor, and I came in to serve pasta to people who spend more on one meal than I make in a week." She looked up at him then. and there was no accusation in her eyes, just exhaustion. I called her during my break. She didn't cry or throw a fit. She just said, "It's okay, Mommy. We can celebrate tomorrow." She's 7 years old, and she already knows to expect disappointment. James sat very still, his hands folded on the white tablecloth. A memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp. His own daughter at 7 crying because he'd missed her dance recital for a business dinner. The look on her face, the way she'd stopped asking him to come to things after that. "I'm sorry," Sophie said quickly, standing up and grabbing her cloth. "I shouldn't have dumped all that on you. I'll get back to work." But James was already pulling out his phone, his jaw set in a way that his business partners would have recognized as dangerous. When he got that look, something was about to change. "Sit back down," James said, his voice quiet but firm. Sophie froze, uncertain. He looked up from his phone, and his expression had shifted into something she couldn't quite read. "Please." "I'm not finished." She sat slowly, watching as he scrolled through his phone with quick, decisive movements. The soft glow illuminated his face, highlighting the lines around his eyes, lines that spoke of years of hard decisions and harder lessons. Finally, he set the phone down and looked at her directly. "How old is your daughter?" he asked. 7, I told you. What's her name?" "Lily." Sophie's voice was barely a whisper now, confused by the intensity of his focus. "And you're working here because?" "Because I need to survive," she said, a little defensively. "My husband left 2 years ago. Didn't leave a note, didn't leave money, just vanished one morning like we never mattered. I've got a high school diploma and a daughter who needs everything. This job pays better than retail." James nodded slowly, his fingers drumming once on the table. "Do you know what I was doing when I was your age?" Sophie shook her head, unsure where this was going. "I was working 3 jobs," he said. "Gas station overnight shifts, weekend construction, and Thursday evenings I cleaned office buildings. My daughter was 6 years old, and my wife was working as a nurse, pulling double shifts. We were drowning." He paused, and something flickered across his face. Old pain, carefully buried. "I missed everything. Every birthday, every school play, every moment that mattered. I told myself it was necessary, that I was building something better for her." "You built all this," Sophie said quietly, gesturing to the elegant restaurant around them. "It worked." "Did it?" James's laugh was hollow. "My daughter's 31 now. Lives in Oregon. We talk maybe twice a year on holidays for about 10 minutes each time. She's polite, kind even. But there's this distance between us that no amount of money can bridge. I bought her everything she ever needed, but I wasn't there when she needed me." He met Sophie's eyes. "She doesn't hate me. That might be worse. She just doesn't need me." The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Sophie's tears had stopped, replaced by a kind of awed sadness. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be sorry for me," James said, his voice hardening with resolve. "Be better than I was." He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Come with me." "What?" "Come on." He was already walking toward his office at the back of the restaurant, and after a moment's hesitation, Sophie followed, her heart pounding with uncertainty and something that might have been hope. His office was exactly what she'd imagined: dark wood, leather chairs, framed photos of restaurant openings and awards. But what caught her attention was the small frame on his desk, nearly hidden behind a stack of ledgers. A little girl with missing front teeth, grinning at the camera, holding a homemade birthday cake. James saw her looking. "That's Emily. That was her 7th birthday. I missed it for a meeting with investors." He picked up the phone on his desk and dialed a number from memory. Someone answered on the second ring. "David? It's James. I need you to do something for me." His restaurant manager's voice came through faintly, surprised and confused. "Tomorrow I need you to block out Sophie's schedule. Give her the next 3 days off, paid. No, I don't care about coverage. Figure it out." A pause. "And David?" "Give her a raise, 20%. Another pause, longer this time. "Because I'm the owner and I'm telling you to. We'll talk tomorrow." He hung up and turned to Sophie, who was standing frozen in the doorway, her hand over her mouth. "Mr. Hartwell, I can't—" "Yes, you can," he interrupted. "And you will." He pulled out his wallet and extracted 5 crisp $100 bills, setting them on the desk. Take your daughter to that arcade tomorrow. Buy her new shoes. Have that picnic. And if anyone asks why, you tell them it's because someone finally learned from their mistakes. Sophie was crying again, but these tears were different. Why are you doing this? James looked at the photo of his daughter again, that gap-toothed smile frozen in time. Because I can't get those years back with Emily, but maybe you can still have yours with Lily. He picked up his phone again. What's your address? I'm calling you a car service. I can take the bus. It's almost 11 at night. Humor me. As he arranged the car, Sophie stood in the doorway of his office, overwhelmed. When he finished, she took a tentative step forward. Mr. Hartwell? Thank you. I don't know what to say. Don't thank me, he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. Just be there for her. That's all I ask. Be there. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. As Sophie left that night, climbing into the hired car with the money carefully folded in her pocket, James stood in the empty restaurant and made a decision. He pulled out his phone and opened a new message to his daughter Emily. His fingers hovered over the screen for a long moment before he began to type. I know it's been a while. I was wondering if you'd like to have coffee this weekend. I have some things I'd like to say. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then looked around at the empty tables, the perfect lighting, the expensive everything. And for the first time in 20 years, he wondered what it had all cost him. The response from Emily came at 2 in the morning. James was still awake, sitting in his home office with a glass of untouched whiskey, when his phone buzzed. His heart lurched as he read the single word. Okay, not I'd love to or can't wait to see you. Just okay. But it was something, more than he'd had in years. He couldn't sleep that night. Instead, he found himself looking through old photo albums he'd kept boxed in the closet. Emily's childhood preserved in snapshots he'd barely been present for. His ex-wife had taken most of these photos. There was Emily at her first dance recital, the one he'd missed. Emily holding up a straight-A report card to an empty chair at the kitchen table because he'd been at a restaurant inspection. Emily's high school graduation, where he'd arrived 40 minutes late and missed her valedictorian speech. In every photo, she was smiling. She'd been such a sunny child, so eager to please, so quick to forgive. Until slowly, over the years, that eagerness had faded into polite distance. He'd lost her not through one catastrophic moment, but through 1,000 small absences. The next morning, Wednesday, James arrived at the restaurant at 6 a.m., earlier than usual. He found David, his manager, already there, preparing for the day's deliveries. We need to talk, James said. David looked up from his clipboard, wary. The man was efficient, professional, and had been with James for 12 years. He'd also learned to read his boss's moods. About Sophie? About a lot of things. James poured himself coffee from the staff pot, something he never did, and sat down at one of the prep tables. Tell me about the staff. Really tell me. Not the performance metrics. Who are they? David blinked, clearly thrown. Sir? Sophie has a 7-year-old daughter. I've employed her for 3 weeks, and I didn't know that until last night. What else don't I know? David set down his clipboard slowly. Is this a test? No, it's a reckoning. James met his eyes. I built this business by being ruthless with efficiency. Tight schedules, minimum staffing, maximum output. It's made me very wealthy and very successful. But last night I saw a woman crying over missing her daughter's birthday because we don't build any flexibility into our system. So I'm asking you, what else am I not seeing? For a moment, David just stared at him. Then, carefully, he pulled out a chair and sat down. Marcus, the line cook, has been working with a stress fracture in his wrist for 2 months because he can't afford to take time off for it to heal. Jenny requested 3 days off for her mother's cancer treatment, and we could only give her 1. Tom is taking online classes to become a paralegal, but he has to study in his car between shifts because the schedule's too tight for anything else. James felt each word like a physical blow. Why didn't you tell me? With respect, sir, when was the last time you asked? David's voice was gentle but firm. You built this business on a model, and the model works. We're profitable, efficient, successful. But people aren't numbers on a spreadsheet. James set down his coffee cup carefully. No, they're not. He was quiet for a long moment, thinking. I'm going to ask you something, and I need absolute honesty. If we increased staffing by 20%, built in flexible scheduling, gave real personal days, what would it cost us? David pulled out his phone and opened a spreadsheet. He'd clearly been thinking about this. Initially, about 15% of our profit margin. But sir, employee retention would improve, which saves on training costs. Morale would increase, which affects service quality. And reputation. In this industry, reputation is everything. So in the long term, we'd probably break even, maybe even come out ahead. But it would require faith in people over pure efficiency. James thought about Emily's gap-toothed smile. About Sophie's daughter, learning too young that disappointment was normal. About all the years he'd optimized for profit and lost everything else. Do it, he said. Start with Hartwell's on 5th. Build a new model. Hire the extra staff, implement flexible scheduling, create real benefits. I want this place to be somewhere people want to work, not somewhere they have to work. David's eyes widened. Sir, the other restaurant owners in the district will think you've lost your mind. Maybe I have. James stood up, and there was something different in his posture now. Lighter somehow. Or maybe I'm finally finding it. I have coffee with my daughter this weekend, David. First time in 3 years we'll be in the same room. I don't want to show up with nothing changed except my words. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. As David left to start making plans, James pulled out his phone and looked at Emily's message again. Just one word, okay, but it was a door opening. Now he had to figure out if he was brave enough to walk through it. And wise enough not to bring his old self along for the journey. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything feel possible. James stood outside the small coffee shop Emily had suggested. Not one of his upscale establishments, but a cozy neighborhood place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. He was 15 minutes early, his palms sweating like he was a teenager on a first date. Emily arrived exactly on time. She looked so much like her mother it made his chest ache. The same thoughtful eyes, the same way of tilting her head when she was uncertain. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Professional but casual, guarded but present. "Hi, Dad," she said, and the word felt both familiar and foreign. Emily. He resisted the urge to hug her, sensing her boundaries. "Thank you for coming." They ordered coffee. She got a simple latte, he got black coffee he didn't want, and sat at a corner table. The silence stretched between them, years of distance packed into seconds. "You wanted to talk," Emily finally said, and there was no accusation in her voice, just patient waiting. James had rehearsed this 100 times, but now every prepared word fled his mind. Instead, he found himself saying, "I met someone this week who reminded me of you." Emily's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh?" A young woman with a 7-year-old daughter. "She was crying because she'd missed her daughter's birthday to work at my restaurant." He paused, watching Emily's face carefully, and I realized I was the reason she was crying. Not directly, but the system I built, the way I run things. It forced her to choose between her child and survival. Something shifted in Emily's expression. Not judgment, but recognition. "I gave her 3 days off and a raise," James continued. "I sent her home that night with money for her daughter. And then I sat in my office and thought about all your birthdays I missed. All the times I sent your mother home with gifts instead of showing up myself. Dad, please let me finish." His voice cracked slightly. "I told myself I was building something for you, that the sacrifices were worth it because I was creating security, opportunity, a legacy. But the truth is, I was building an empire and losing a daughter. I optimized my business until there was no room for humanity in it, including my own." Emily's eyes were glistening now, but she didn't look away. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm trying to change, and I don't know if it's too late, but I need you to know I finally understand what I lost." He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even asking for a relationship. I just needed you to know that I see it now. I see what I did, what I didn't do, and I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry, Emily." The words hung in the air between them. Emily was quiet for a long moment, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "Do you know what the hardest part was?" she asked. "It wasn't that you missed things. Kids are resilient, they understand work. It was that you never seemed to care that you'd missed them. You'd show up late or not at all, and then you'd just move on like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. James felt the words like a knife to the chest, but he didn't look away. You were everything. You are everything. I just didn't know how to show you that without failing at business, and I didn't know how to succeed at business without failing you. So I made a choice, and it was the wrong one. Yeah, Emily said quietly. It was. They sat in silence again, but this silence felt different. Raw, but honest. I have a son, Emily said finally. Your grandson? He's 3. His name is Daniel, James's breath caught. You have a son. I didn't tell you because... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Because I didn't want him to expect a grandfather who wouldn't show up. I didn't want to set him up for the disappointment I felt. I understand, James said, and he did. It hurt, but he understood. Thank you for telling me now. Emily studied him for a long moment, searching for something in his face. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she pulled out her phone and turned it toward him. The screen showed a little boy with dark, curly hair and Emily's thoughtful eyes, laughing as he splashed in a kiddie pool. He loves dinosaurs, Emily said, and he asks about my dad sometimes. I never knew what to tell him. James looked at the photo, this grandchild he'd never met, and felt something break open in his chest. What would you like to tell him? Emily was quiet for a moment, then said, I'd like to tell him that his grandfather is learning to be better. If that's true. It's true, James said, his voice thick with emotion. I promise you, Emily, it's true. I'm closing the restaurant today to implement new staffing policies. I'm changing how I do business, but more than that, I'm changing who I am. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. Emily nodded slowly, and for the first time in years, she smiled at him, a real smile, tentative but genuine. Then maybe we could have coffee again next week? I'd like that, James said. I'd like that very much. 3 months later, James stood in the middle of Hartwell's on 5th during the lunch rush, watching his restaurant operate in a way it never had before. The dining room was full, the kitchen hummed with efficient energy, but there was something different now. Laughter from the staff area, the sound of actual conversations rather than barked orders, a sense of ease that had never existed under his old system. Sophie was working the main dining room, and when she caught his eye, she smiled. A genuine, warm smile. Her daughter Lily had sent him a crayon drawing last month, a picture of him with a crown labeled the Nice Restaurant King, and he'd framed it in his office, right next to the old photo of Emily. The changes had been expensive at first, exactly as David predicted. They'd hired additional staff, created flexible scheduling, implemented real personal days and family leave. Some of the other restaurant owners had called him foolish, said he was being too soft, that he'd lose his competitive edge. But something unexpected had happened. Service had improved. Employee retention had skyrocketed. Word had spread, and now his restaurants were getting press not just for their food, but for their workplace culture. Young chefs were asking to work for him specifically, and profit, after the initial dip, had actually started climbing again. But that wasn't what mattered most to James anymore. What mattered was the standing weekly coffee date with Emily, which had expanded to include visits to her house. What mattered was Daniel, his 3-year-old grandson, who now called him Papa James and insisted on showing him every dinosaur in his collection. What mattered was last Tuesday, when Emily had called him in the middle of the day just to chat, about nothing in particular, like it was the most natural thing in the world. What mattered was that he'd stopped optimizing his life for profit and started living it for purpose. Marcus, the line cook with the stress fracture, had his wrist properly treated and was back to full strength. Jenny's mother was in remission, and Jenny herself had been promoted to sous chef. Tom had completed his paralegal certificate and was moving on to law school, but he'd stayed through the transition to help train new staff, telling James that loyalty mattered to him. The restaurant industry was buzzing about what James Hartwell was doing, and slowly a few others were starting to follow suit. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a shift. One restaurant at a time, one policy change at a time, one human life valued at a time. David found him standing by the host stand, lost in thought. "The inspector from the culinary magazine is here." "The one doing the feature on workplace innovation in fine dining?" James nodded. "Give her full access. Show her everything. The scheduling system, the staff benefits, the whole operation. I want her to see it all, and even the costs, especially the costs. Let other owners see that it's possible to be profitable and humane at the same time." As David went to greet the inspector, James's phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "Daniel wants to know if Papa James can come to his dinosaur birthday party next Saturday. It's at 2 p.m., no work excuses accepted." James smiled and typed back immediately. "I'll be there at 1:30. Wouldn't miss it for anything in the world." And he meant it. He'd already blocked out the entire day in his calendar, marked it as non-negotiable personal time. Daniel's 4th birthday would not be missed, not by him, not ever. Sophie passed by with a tray of dishes, paused and said, "Mr. Hartwell? I just wanted to say thank you again. Lily's doing so much better now that I have predictable hours. She made honor roll last month. That's wonderful, Sophie. You should be proud." "I am," she said, and there was no trace of the crying woman he'd met 3 months ago. "And thank you for showing me it was possible to be proud, to not have to choose between being a good mother and surviving." After she left, James walked slowly through the restaurant, really looking at his staff for the first time in years. Each person had a story, a life, a family, dreams beyond these walls. They weren't just cogs in his machine. They were human beings who deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. He thought about that night he'd found Sophie crying, and how close he'd come to walking past her like he'd walked past so many others. One moment of actually seeing another person's pain had changed everything, not just for her, but for him, for Emily, for everyone who worked in his restaurants now. That evening, after the restaurant closed, James drove to Emily's house. She answered the door with Daniel in her arms, the little boy already in his dinosaur pajamas. "Papa James!" Daniel squealed, reaching for him. James took his grandson in his arms, feeling the solid weight of him, the complete trust in his small hands. Emily smiled, watching them together. "You want to stay for dinner?" she asked. "Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and meatballs." "I'd love that," James said, and followed her inside. Daniel chattering about dinosaurs and birthday parties and all the important things a 3-year-old finds urgent. As he sat at Emily's kitchen table that night, helping Daniel sort plastic dinosaurs by size, James realized something profound. He'd spent 30 years building an empire, and it had taken one crying waitress to teach him what actually mattered. Success wasn't measured in restaurants or profit margins. It was measured in moments like this, in being present, in showing up, in choosing people over everything else. He'd finally learned what his ex-wife had tried to tell him years ago. He'd finally become the man he should have been all along, and it wasn't too late. That was the beautiful thing. It was never too late to change, to grow, to choose differently. You just had to be brave enough to see what needed changing and humble enough to do it. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales like this one. Thank you for joining James on his journey, and may we all remember that it's never too late to choose what truly matters.